Welcome back, everyone. This is the 11th installment of the Arthashastra series.
Great to be back.
We often picture ancient rulers amidst luxury, but scratch the surface and, well, you find they were constantly grappling with threats, how to hold on to power, how to expand it. Today, learner, we're diving into the mind of a master strategist from ancient India, Kautilya. His insights into warfare and statecraft are really mind-blowingly detailed.
Exactly. And we'll be exploring excerpts from his Arthashastra, specifically the sections on defense and war and related governance. Think of it as unlocking an ancient playbook for rulers, where military strategy encompasses pretty much everything from battlefield maneuvers right through to long-term security.
Right. So our mission today is to extract the core of Kautilya's strategic genius when it came to conflict. We're going from his fundamental understanding of what war is, all the way to the practicalities of winning battles and then, crucially, governing conquered territories. Prepare for a surprisingly, maybe even modern take on ancient conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this. When Kautilya talked about war, it wasn't just, swords and shields, was it? Not at all. What's fascinating is his broad perspective. He actually outlines four distinct types of war. First, there's Mantrayuddha.
Mantrayuddha.
Yeah, which he describes as war by counsel or diplomacy. This is key for a ruler who's maybe weaker. Using negotiation as your primary weapon it shows real strategic flexibility even back then.
So, talking your way out of a fight or into an advantage when you're not the strongest makes perfect sense. What's next on his list?
Next is Prakasayuddha.
Okay.
That's open warfare, the kind of battle we typically imagine, Armies meeting at a predetermined time and place for a direct confrontation.
The classic showdown. Got it. And after that?
Then we get to Kutayuddha, which is concealed warfare.
Ah, concealed.
And here's where things get really interesting. It's primarily about psychological warfare, what he called upajapa. Think about instigating treachery within the enemy's ranks, spreading rumors, basically undermining them from within.
Ah, sowing chaos behind enemy lines.
Right.
Clever and definitely underhanded. And the last category.
Finally, there's Gudayuddha, or clandestine war.
Okay.
This involves secret methods to weaken or eliminate the enemy without any open conflict. Assassination would certainly fall into this category. Kautilya even discusses using not just your own agents, but allies,
Right.
even double agents within the enemy's structure.
Wow, a whole spectrum of conflict, from high-level diplomacy right down to the darkest of covert ops. It really shows how sophisticated their understanding of power dynamics was. Now, when it came to just, protecting their own borders, what were Kautilya's main ideas for defending the realm?
Well, the king had a kind of dual mandate, internal stability and external security. And that external part also factored in potential expansion, of course.
Right.
For physical defense, Kautilya stressed the importance of frontier posts. To control who and what entered your territory, a surprisingly modern concern, actually.
Border control.
Exactly. He also meticulously details four types of forts: mountain, river, jungle, and desert, each one strategically placed to exploit the local terrain. And we can't forget the ordnance weapons, armor, even siege machines. They had some quite advanced weaponry for the time.
Forts strategically placed, that's logical. But how do they make sure their armies remain loyal and effective? You can have the best fortifications, but if your own soldiers are plotting against you, well, that's a problem.
Exactly. And Kautilya developed a really comprehensive system for maintaining army control. This included things like ensuring good pay for commanders to discourage bribery and rigorous integrity tests to weed out the unreliable or cowardly types.
Integrity tests, how did those work?
Well, the texts mention various scenarios to test loyalty and courage, kind of like early psychological profiling. Plus, constant surveillance by secret agents was crucial to prevent enemy influence. He even advised appointing multiple chiefs to each army wing.
Why multiple?
To foster a degree of mutual suspicion, basically. It reinforced loyalty back to the crown, not just to their immediate commander.
Wow.
And suspected traitors. They might be sent to remote areas where their families effectively held as hostages, or even secretly eliminated.
Three drastic measures.
It paints a picture of a state constantly on guard. Reflects Kautilya's core belief that, trust is a luxury a ruler can rarely afford.
Okay, so that's control during wartime, or potential wartime. What about managing the army when there wasn't an active war? You can't keep everyone mobilized all the time, surely.
No, absolutely not. Kautilya discusses the strategic advantages of demobilization in peacetime. You'd maintain only the necessary forces for immediate defense, with reserves ready if a campaign kicked off.
So a standing army, but smaller.
Right. These standing forces primarily guarded key locations like forts and royal properties. Interestingly, there was a special unit, the Antavamsika, the king's own guards, which was never disbanded.
The elite guard.
Precisely. And when other troops were demobilized, the advice was to keep them dispersed within your own country.
Why is that? Not just to save money.
Well, partly saving money, yes, but also for easier remobilization. Keeping them local ensures you can quickly call them back when needed, and it prevents them from potentially becoming a threat somewhere else, maybe joining a rival.
Clever. Now, logistics back then must have been a huge headache. How did they even manage to supply a large mobile army?
Kautilya had a system for that too, quite an ingenious one. When a campaign force was assembled, the king would provide goods on credit to the soldiers.
On credit?
Yes, but through disguised agents, like traders. This ensured the troops had resources while they were away, and the state recouped the cost, often at double the price, upon their return from the campaign.
So it provisions the army and potentially turns a profit for the state treasury.
Exactly. A very clever way to both provision the army and manage state resources.
Ingenious. Now, let's talk about the actual fighting force. We always hear about the classic 4 divisions in ancient India. What did Kautilya tell us about them?
He outlines the traditional 4-wing army: elephants, chariots, horses, and infantry. No surprise there. But he also specified support ratios for effective battlefield deployment. Yeah, like 1 horseman supporting 6 infantry soldiers.
Yeah.
And 1 elephant or chariot was supported by 5 cavalry units. It suggests a real focus on combined arms tactics, not just throwing units into the fray.
That makes sense. What about the infantry?
The infantry themselves were equipped for both ranged combat archers and close quarters, fighting with swords, spears, lances, that sort of thing. He even mentioned specialized units, like fighters on water.
Fighters on water? Really?
Yes, and the use of trench warfare tactics. Details you don't often associate with ancient warfare.
That is fascinating. And who did Kautilya prefer to have in his army? Were there specific types of people?
His preference leaned towards trained Kshatriyas, the traditional warrior caste. That's expected. Or alternatively, a large contingent from the Sudra and Vaishya communities, the agricultural and merchant classes.
But not Brahmins, the priestly caste.
Interestingly, he advised against a heavy reliance on Brahmins.
Why was that?
He believed they might be too easily disarmed if an enemy showed religious deference, like prostrating themselves. A very pragmatic, if perhaps socially complex view.
Practicality over piety on the battlefield.
Pretty much. He also categorized troops into 6 types, right?
Yes, you mentioned that earlier. Let's revisit those.
Right. There's the standing army, the Malla, the territorial army, Brida, militias called Sreni, then friendly troops, Mitra, alien forces, Amitra, and tribal forces, Atavi.
And only the first 3 were considered truly reliable.
Exactly. The standing army, territorial army, and militias, they were considered native and therefore more dependable. The others, less so.
And how did these different troop types fit into their overall military campaigns? You mentioned Yana.
Yes, Yana, which translates roughly as marching on a military campaign, was a key element of foreign policy. Not just moving troops, but a strategic act. This involved establishing a fortified base camp, usually near your own territory, acting as a secure fallback position. And interestingly, the layout of this base camp often mirrored the design of a city plan.
A home base for the war effort.
Precisely. When it came to actual combat, they could choose between those open battles we mentioned, Prakasayuddha, or more strategic options like hit-and-run tactics and ambushes, falling under the concealed or clandestine types of warfare.
So flexibility was key.
Absolutely. And after a victory, Kautilya advised different approaches depending on the enemy's remaining strength. Seek peace with stronger rulers, agree to peace with equals, and decisively eliminate weaker ones.
But carefully.
Yes, while always being mindful not to push a defeated enemy into a desperate, suicidal last stand.
You can really see the level of sophistication here. It's not just about brute force, is it?
Not at all. It's a carefully planned dance of diplomacy, strategy, different troop types, logistics, reflecting that deep strategic thinking we started with.
So conflict was viewed as a very deliberate process with specific goals in mind. What were some of the ultimate aims when engaging in war, according to Kautilya?
Well, the objectives could range quite a bit. From securing your borders by neutralizing threats to your rear, to supporting your allies, or expanding your influence by subduing smaller, weaker states.
And the big one.
Ultimately, the aim was often the elimination of the natural enemy, the primary rival, the main obstacle to your long-term ambitions.
How would they achieve that elimination?
Several ways. Through those covert operations, Gudayuddha, through decisive battlefield victories, or by absorbing their territory and making them a vassal state. Taking refuge in forts was a common defensive tactic, which made siege warfare a critical skill.
Right, breaking through those defenses.
Exactly. With the ultimate goal always being the consolidation of newly acquired lands. It's a complete life cycle of conflict management.
Okay, now let's get into the specifics of the fighting force itself. What did Katir consider the hallmarks of an ideal army?
This is where Kautilya gets incredibly granular. He uses the concept of calamities.
Calamities.
Yeah, basically anything that can weaken a constituent part of the state, including its army. He defines the ideal army by what it lacks these calamities. He lists, get this, 34 potential calamities affecting an army's fighting ability, often pairing remediable and irremediable issues.
34? That's an astonishingly detailed checklist of potential weaknesses. Just the number itself tells you something.
It really does. It shows his meticulousness, trying to anticipate basically any eventuality.
So, based on avoiding these calamities, what were some of the key qualities of an ideal army according to this exhaustive list?
Okay, so an ideal army should be well compensated and respected, that keeps morale high and discourages corruption. It needs to maintain its strength and esprit de corps. It should be free of internal dissent and treachery. Big one, that. It should be kept intact, even when demobilized, within your own territory for swift redeployment. You don't want it fragmented. It should never be left without leadership. Never merge haphazardly with other units. Reliable reinforcements are essential. And critically, troops should be deployed in favorable conditions, not exhausted, fighting on suitable terrain in the right season. And high morale is absolutely paramount.
So a well-oiled, loyal, logistically sound fighting force operating under the best possible conditions.
That's the goal. He even details potential vulnerabilities for forts, things like internal strife or external blockades disrupting supplies.
And what about the different types of troops we discussed earlier, the standing army, militias, etc.? Were there specific qualities that made certain types excellent?
Yes, definitely. For infantry, the best were those that mirrored the ideal army as a whole. So, proven loyalty, physical strength, obedience to command, endurance for long campaigns, proficiency with all types of weapons, and significant battle experience. Basically, seasoned, reliable veterans.
And the animals, horses and elephants.
They were judged just as rigorously. By their lineage, physical power, youth and vitality, speed and agility, courage in battle, effective training, stamina, good temperament, and obedience, even down to auspicious physical markings and good overall conduct.
Even your elephants needed to mind their manners.
Apparently so. It's a fantastic detail, isn't it?
It really is. Now, we touched on the 6 types of troops. Did Kautilya have a preferred order for mobilizing them when war broke out?
Absolutely. There was a very clear hierarchy of preference. The standing army, the Malna, was considered the most reliable and therefore the best option, your core professionals.
Okay, top tier.
Following that were the territorial army, Brita, then the militias, Stranis, then friendly troops,
Itur.
and finally alien, Emetra, and tribal forces, Atavi, which were viewed as the least dependable.
Why were they seen as less reliable?
Primarily because their main motivation was often plunder. They might not share the same strategic objectives as the king, and could potentially be unreliable in difficult situations or even switch sides if offered a better deal.
Makes sense. What were the criteria for this ranking?
Things like their dependence on the king, their level of training, their physical proximity to the state, their obedience, whether they shared common goals, and also the potential for internal rivalries or resentments between different troop types.
It's all about trust and control, isn't it?
Fundamentally, yes.
Mm-hmm.
We also see that discussion again about the social composition preferring Kshatriyas or large Sudra forces over Brahmins for those practical battlefield reasons. Loyalty and reliability were key, maybe even more than just raw fighting power.
Okay, let's move on to the actual structure of this military organization. Who were the key command figures? What did the hierarchy look like?
Right. At the very top was the chief of defense, the Senapati, who had overall command of the entire military.
The big boss?
Exactly. Below him were the chiefs of the 4 wings, chariots, elephants, horses, and infantry. Plus, critically, the chief of ordnance, managing all the equipment. Reporting to the wing chiefs were divisional commanders, called Nayaka, then battalion commanders, and confusingly, these were also sometimes referred to as Senapati.
Oh, that is confusing.
It is slightly, yes. We have to distinguish based on context. And finally, company commanders, or Patika. The key takeaway from this structure is the clear chain of command, but also the built-in redundancy and that constant surveillance at every level, ensuring control flows from the top down.
A very clear hierarchy, it seems, despite the naming confusion. How many soldiers were typically in each of these units? Do we know?
Yes, the structure was quite rigidly based on multiples of 10. You'd have 10 basic units under a patika, company commander, 10 patikas under a senapati, battalion commander, and 10 such senapatis under a nayaka, divisional commander.
Very organized.
Extremely. Each division also had its own distinct trumpet calls, flags, and banners for identification and signaling on the battlefield, crucial for command and control.
And what were the main jobs of these commanders, the Nayakas and battalion-level Senabatis?
They were responsible for crucial tasks like mobilization and demobilization of their units and ensuring the troops received their wages and rations on time, keeping the soldiers paid and fed.
Basic, but essential.
Absolutely. Interestingly, units responsible for guarding vital assets, royal property, the city, key areas in the countryside were permanent fixtures. But their commanders were frequently rotated,
Rotated. Why?
likely to prevent them from building up too much personal loyalty or power within a specific region or garrison. Another control mechanism.
Checks and balances everywhere.
And, as we've mentioned, constant surveillance of the soldiers was maintained through that network of secret agents, always watching.
Now, what were the specific roles and required skills for some of these top defense officials? Let's start with the chief of defense, the overall commander.
Right, the top Senapachi. He needed to be a master of all types of weaponry, a skilled rider of all war, mounts elephants, horses, chariots, and possess a deep understanding of the strengths, weaknesses, and deployment capabilities of each of the 4 army wings. He had to know everything.
A true military expert.
Absolutely. His responsibilities were extensive, maintaining discipline, identifying different formations through signals like trumpet calls and flags, and overseeing all strategic and tactical planning. That means deciding the best timing and terrain for campaigns, devising plans for breaking enemy lines, regrouping scattered forces, besieging forts, the whole 9 yards. A true commander-in-chief.
What about the commanders of the individual army wings? You mentioned elephants seem particularly important.
Absolutely. Kautilya really highlights the critical role of elephants in achieving victory. They were the ancient tanks, in a way. The chief commander of the Elephant Corps was responsible for everything related to these animals. Their different breeds, protecting the elephant-rich forests where they were sourced, the construction and maintenance of their stables, their rations, their training, assigning them specific tasks in battle or logistics, maintaining their elaborate equipment, even overseeing their veterinary care.
Wow, a huge job.
It was. And under him was the chief elephant forester. His crucial role was actually capturing wild elephants. This involved protecting the elephant forests, meticulously tracking herds and individual elephants, noting their type, age, condition, and judging their suitability for capture.
Tracking wild elephants. How?
Footprints, dung analysis using decoy elephants, quite sophisticated methods. Rewards were even offered for the tusks of wild elephants that died naturally to encourage reporting and prevent poaching.
A whole infrastructure just for the Elephant Corps.
It really was. Shows their perceived importance.
And what about the cavalry? The chief commander of cavalry.
Similar level of expertise required. He needed to be an expert on horse breeds, understanding their characteristics based on region of origin, different training methods for different temperaments, their work capabilities.
No, not just any horse would do.
Definitely not. His responsibilities mirrored those for the Elephant Corps.
Yeah.
Managing stables, keeping detailed records of every single horse breed, age, color, origin, how it was acquired, supervising personnel like trainers and vets, managing rations, ensuring health and well-being, bathing, decoration, even offerings, overseeing training for various roles, riding, pack duties, chariot pulling, and of course, warfare, and even supervising the manufacture of their equipment, like saddles and bridles.
It sounds like managing the animals was almost as complex as managing the soldiers.
In many ways, yes. A significant undertaking in itself.
It certainly does. What about the chariot and infantry commanders? Similar roles.
Largely similar administrative responsibilities, yes. But the chief commander of the chariot corps needed additional specialized knowledge, like how to effectively use weapons from a moving chariot and the specific duties of charioteers and their attendants. He was also responsible for setting up workshops to build the various types of chariots.
Different chariot types, too.
Oh, yes. Various sizes and designs for different purposes. The chief commander of infantry, on the other hand, needed a deep understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of different infantry troop types. Various fighting tactics, depending on terrain, open ground versus covert operations, day versus night fighting, and crucially, how to maintain the physical fitness of his troops. Their administrative duties were similar to the cavalry chiefs.
And finally, the chief of ordnance. What was their crucial role in all this?
The chief of ordnance was absolutely vital. They were responsible for establishing and overseeing the manufacturing of all types of military hardware, both offensive and defensive stuff, battle engines, siege machines, all kinds of weapons, armor, everything.
The quartermaster general, essentially.
And then some. They managed the storage facilities, ensuring proper conditions, regular rotation of equipment to prevent deterioration, maintain meticulous inventories, tracking even destroyed or damaged weapons. They controlled the entire supply chain.
Supply chain management in ancient India.
Pretty much. Demand, procurement, distribution, tracking wear and tear, managing replenishment. And for accountability, everything in the armory was even stamped with the king's official seal.
Wow. So a complex web of specialized roles all working together. It's impressive.
It really is a highly structured and organized military machine.
Now that we understand the individual components and the command structure, how did these four wings of the army function together on the battlefield? What were their jobs?
Right. Kautilya meticulously details the specific roles for each wing and also includes the essential support provided by the labor force. He constantly stresses that the suitability of the terrain and the timing of the engagement were critical factors for success.
Makes sense. So chariots, what did they do?
Chariots were employed for protection, repelling enemy attacks, capturing strategic positions, reforming broken friendly ranks, and also for psychological impact. They could generate terror, project magnificence, and make a lot of noise. He even notes using bullocks if horses were scarce.
Resourceful. And elephants. We know they were important.
Hugely important. Elephants were vital for leading advances, literally creating infrastructure like roads and fords on the march, providing flank protection, navigating difficult terrain like water or mountains, controlling fires, achieving decisive breakthroughs in enemy lines, manipulating enemy formations, offering protection to their own troops, trampling enemy soldiers, causing fear and terror, projecting magnificence, capturing enemy wealth, and even destroying fortifications.
The heavy hitters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Best used after the hot season, or in wet conditions, apparently. Again, using carts if elephants were in short supply.
What about the horses? Cavalry roles.
Horses excelled at reconnaissance scouting ahead, securing key terrain and resources, protecting supply lines, maintaining discipline within formations, extending the reach of raids, providing flank security, initiating attacks, penetrating enemy lines, offering swift respite to exhausted troops, managing prisoners, creating diversions, transporting the treasury or important figures like the prince, launching attacks from the rear and flanks, pursuing weakened enemies, guarding their own troops, and rallying scattered forces. Very versatile.
The eyes, ears, and fast movers. And the infantry.
The infantry, the ever-present backbone of the army, their strength was their universality, capable of bearing arms at all times and in virtually any location or condition, suited for all sorts of terrain.
The dependable corps.
Yeah.
And the labor force.
While not a combat arm, they were indispensable, maintaining camps and roads, constructing vital infrastructure like embankments and wells, ensuring fords were usable, transporting all the material weapons, food, supplies, and crucially evacuating the wounded and damaged equipment from the battlefield during and after the fight.
Unsung heroes, perhaps.
You could say that. Teamwork makes the dream work, even in ancient warfare.
So each wing had its own strengths and weaknesses depending on the situation. And these wings also had different modes of fighting, you mentioned, different tactics.
Yes, specific tactical options. Horses and elephants had some similar options. Rushing head-on, holding a position defensively, surrounding the enemy, a pincer movement, using zigzagging maneuvers to confuse, encircling the enemy completely, feigning retreat, and then counterattacking, protecting their own flanks and rear, and pursuing fleeing enemies.
And elephants had unique tricks.
Yes, like specifically destroying enemy formations, trampling large numbers of opponents, and launching terrifying surprise attacks.
What about chariots?
Chariots had a similar range of tactics to elephants, except they weren't really suited for holding enemy forces in place. They needed relatively flat, suitable terrain. They could fight moving forward, backward, or even remaining stationary to provide a stable platform for archers.
And infantry.
Infantry were the most adaptable, capable of attacking at any time, anywhere. They could even specialize in silent attacks for infiltration or ambushes.
It sounds like a very dynamic and adaptable approach to combat, using the right tool for the job.
Exactly. Not just a single blunt instrument.
And how were these forces kept sharp and under control when not actively fighting?
Training was a daily routine, typically conducted outside the city walls, often at sunrise. The king himself would often take a personal interest, conducting inspections to keep everyone on their toes.
Royal oversight.
And control, as we've discussed, was rigorously maintained through constant surveillance by that network of secret agents. Using seemingly innocuous individuals, prostitutes, artisans, entertainers, even long-serving military personnel, all tasked with observing the loyalty and honesty of the soldiers.
Can't have too many eyes on your troops, it seems.
Seems like Kautilya's philosophy, yes. Trust was earned, not given freely.
Okay, and the selection of battlefield and camping grounds, that must have been a crucial strategic decision as well.
Absolutely critical. Kautilya provides really detailed guidance on the types of terrain and the optimal timing for engaging with each type of troop to leverage their inherent strengths.
Give us some examples.
Okay. Chariots needed level, firm, and unobstructed ground to maneuver effectively. Think open plains. Elephants perform best in hilly, watery, or muddy areas, places with plenty of vegetation they could uproot or use for cover. Horses needed ground with maybe small stones or minor obstacles, things that wouldn't seriously impede their speed, but not perfectly flat either. And infantry, again, were the most versatile, able to operate in a wider variety of terrains, including areas with trees and undergrowth where others couldn't go easily.
So choosing the battleground was choosing your advantage.
Precisely. Factors like evenness of the terrain, favorable sun and wind direction, avoiding facing the sun or fighting into a strong wind, were paramount. Cavalry could be deployed ahead of the main force specifically to secure advantageous positions before the enemy arrived. Fighting on unsuitable ground was considered a major strategic blunder, something that could easily lead to defeat, regardless of troop quality.
And the terrain dictated the formations.
Yes. The choice of battle arrays was also directly influenced by the terrain. Level ground favored truncheon, straight line, or circle formations. Uneven ground called for snake, flexible line, or dispersed formations. Mixed terrain allowed for combined or hybrid arrays.
Terrain dictating tactics, a timeless principle of warfare, really.
Absolutely.
Now, let's delve into the base camp you mentioned earlier. It sounds like more than just tents, like a meticulously planned temporary city built for war.
That's a great way to put it. The base camp, established in a fortified area usually near the operational zone, served as a vital refuge and logistical hub. Its layout was intentionally designed to mirror the capital city plan, complete with moats, watchtowers, and protective ramparts.
Really? A mini city?
In structure, yes. The camp was divided into concentric zones by a network of roads. The king and his most trusted guards, like the Antarvamsikasanya, were located in the innermost and most secure sector. Each subsequent ring, moving outwards, housed officials and troops based on their level of trust and importance. Less trusted forces, like alien or tribal troops, were on the outer edges.
A hierarchy built into the geography of the camp.
Exactly. Obstacle fences made of things like carts lashed together or thorny branches further fortified the perimeter. Strict regulations governed conduct within the camp, designated guards at key points, prohibited activities like disputes, drinking, gambling, and a pass system to control movement and maintain security.
Tight control?
Very. There was also always a plan for a final fallback point, a secure fort, maybe in the mountains, or a forest located back within friendly territory. Camp superintendents were responsible for advanced preparation, selecting the site and establishing the camp before the main army arrived. The layout was even influenced by principles of building science and astrology, apparently.
Astrology.
Yes, even the dimensions and precise location of the king's quarters within the innermost sector were specified based on these principles.
A home away from home, but heavily guarded and meticulously planned.
Precisely.
What about the actual movement of this massive forest from the base camp to the intended battleground? That must have been an incredibly complex undertaking logistically.
Oh, absolutely. The march from the base camp to the battlefield demanded meticulous planning. They had to consider the required rate of advance, the planned duration of any stops along the route, and crucially, the availability of essential supplies like food and water.
How did they manage supplies on the move?
Ideally, the army would carry double the necessary provisions. If that wasn't possible, then self-transport by the troops or using pre-positioned supply depots along the route were the alternatives. The choice of route was critical, prioritizing terrain that offered an advantage to your own forces, not the enemy's.
And the marching order?
There was a specific prescribed order of march. The commander usually led the way, followed by the king and any accompanying women, protected in the center. Cavalry would be on the flanks, providing security. Elephants and reinforcements typically brought up the rear, with the chief of defense overseeing the entire column's movement.
Did they always march at the same speed?
No, the pace was carefully calibrated. It depended on a multitude of factors: potential enemy movements, any obstacles along the route, rivers, mountains, the need to wait for resources or favorable conditions. The enemy's current morale, a slower, deliberate pace, might intimidate a demoralized foe. Intelligence coming in from agents, even the possibility of the enemy sabotaging their own resources ahead of you. If none of those applied, speed was generally preferred.
Lots to consider. What about obstacles like rivers?
Very specialized methods for crossing water are mentioned: bridges, boats, even using inflated skins or large jars. Providing sufficient water transport was critical in arid regions. Numerous protection measures were implemented during the march to safeguard against various threats: ambushes, harassment, fatigue, disease, famine, difficult routes, lack of equipment, even bad weather.
And keeping the enemy guessing.
Yes, concealing the true size and strength of the army during the march was also considered vital for maintaining the element of surprise. Every step of the way seems meticulously planned.
Now, when it came to the actual fighting, Kautilya distinguishes between open and deceptive battles. Tell us more about those different approaches.
Right. So ancient Indian tradition, or dharma, often dictated that for an open battle, prakasayuddha, the time and place should ideally be mutually agreed upon beforehand. A formal challenge.
A gentleman's agreement for war.
Something like that.
Hmm.
The Kautilya advised opting for this open battle only when your own army held a clear superiority, or when efforts to incite discord within the enemy ranks, upajapa, had already been successful, or when all necessary precautions against potential dangers had been taken, and, crucially, when the terrain favored your forces.
So only fight fair if you're sure you'll win.
Essentially, yes. If those conditions weren't met, then deceptive battles, kutayuddha or gudayuddha, were strongly recommended. The fundamental principle was always, attack the enemy when they are suffering from some form of calamity, when they're inadequately protected, or when they're positioned on less advantageous terrain. Exploit weakness.
Makes sense, strategic.
Even when the terrain seems suitable for both sides, he suggests clever tactics, like launching an attack with your full force, but first luring the enemy onto unfavorable ground.
How?
By staging a feigned retreat of your less reliable troops, making it look like you're losing. Once the enemy takes the bait and moves onto bad ground, you hit them hard with a powerful elephant charge to break their formation, followed by an attack from your main, fresh forces.
That's cunning. What other deceptive tactics did he suggest?
Oh, a wide array. Coordinated front and rear attacks, flanking maneuvers, focusing attacks on known weak or unreliable enemy units, using your own unreliable troops first to tire out the enemy, then hitting them with your fresh elite troops, staging a feigned defeat to draw them into an ambush, striking when the enemy is negligent, maybe busy looting after a minor success, concealing a strong reserve force behind a weaker forward line to surprise them.
Keep going, this is fascinating.
Using animals to create diversions or stampedes within enemy ranks, conducting night raids followed by a full-scale day attack, launching silent elephant attacks on sleeping enemy camps, attacking in the afternoon when the enemy might be tired from morning preparations, even frightening the enemy animals, elephants, horses to break their ranks while ensuring your own animals were kept secure and calm.
Psychological warfare with animals.
Absolutely. He reiterates the importance of attacking whenever the enemy shows any kind of vulnerability, and he lists ideal opportunities for ambush: deserts, forests, narrow paths, marshes, mountains, valleys, uneven ground, even using boats or concealed carts, or attacking during mist or at night.
It's like a complete playbook of ancient military trickery.
It really is. Shows a very pragmatic, results-oriented mindset.
What about the crucial preparations that took place just before a major battle? How did they mentally and spiritually prepare the troops for what was coming?
Right. Morale was key. Exhortation of the troops was considered essential. Commanders would give rousing speeches emphasizing their shared commitment, the king's generosity, and the potential rewards of victory, glory, and wealth. Royal counselors and the Purohita, the royal priest, would highlight the strengths of their own army and the specific battle formation they were about to use, boosting confidence.
Yeah, and astrologers.
Astrologers played a role too, yes. They would invoke divine favor for their side, perhaps pointing to auspicious omens, and try to instill fear of negative omens in the enemy through propaganda.
What about the king himself?
On the night before the battle, the king would often engage in specific rituals: fasting, sleeping near his chariot and weapons as a sign of readiness, performing oblations and reciting prayers for victory and for the souls of any comrades who might fall, often following rites from the Atharva Veda. He would also entrust certain religious duties to Brahmins.
Setting a spiritual example.
Yes. Then, on the actual day of battle, the formation was carefully arranged. The bravest, most skilled, noble, loyal, and, interestingly, contented troops were positioned in the center. The king himself was often placed there, but strategically without prominent flags or insignia to avoid being an easy target, surrounded by his warrior kin for protection.
A decoy king, maybe.
Sometimes, a decoy might impersonate the king at the forefront of the army to draw attention. Meanwhile, bards and praise singers would move among the troops, reciting tales of heroism, the glories of heaven for the brave, the horrors of hell for cowards, appealing to clan and family honor.
More morale boosting.
Definitely. Assistants to the Purohita would be chanting spells and performing rituals. Technicians and carpenters stood ready with war machines. Astrologers interpreted any last-minute omens. Then, the chief of defense would formally announce the rewards for bravery. Huge sums, like 100,000 panas for capturing the enemy king, down to 20 panas for killing an ordinary soldier, plus double pay and shares of captured booty.
Serious incentives.
Very serious.
Yeah.
And finally, positioned safely in the rear, you'd have the physicians with their instruments and medicines, ready for casualties. And, intriguingly, women providing food, drink, and perhaps words of encouragement to the troops just before they went into action.
A full psychological, spiritual, and logistical preparation.
Absolutely, covering all the bases.
A fascinating blend of practical strategy and psychological warfare. Now we get to the really intricate part. Battle arrays and formations. This sounds incredibly detailed in the Arthashastra.
It is remarkably so. Kautilya goes into painstaking detail. Okay, so reinforcements were typically positioned about 1 kilometer behind the main battle line, ready to move up. The fundamental fighting units were defined, as we touched on, a single horseman supported by 6-foot soldiers, and a chariot or an elephant supported by 5 cavalry units. These were the basic building blocks.
Okay, the tactical units.
Right. Forces could be deployed in either close order or open order, with specific spacing prescribed between soldiers' infantry closer together, archers needing more room. The spacing for horses, elephants, and chariots was calculated as a multiple of the standard infantry spacing, ensuring proper room for maneuver.
Very precise.
Very. Arrays specifically for chariots and elephants followed identical principles. A minimum deployment might be 9 vehicles arranged in a 3x3 grid, supported by designated cavalry and infantry contingents. But these could scale up significantly to formations of as many as 63 chariots or elephants in complex arrangements.
Wow, huge formations.
Potentially, yes.
Mm-hmm.
These individual arrays, minimum of 5, a center, 2 flanks, and 2 wings, were then combined to form the larger battle formation. They were typically separated by a distance of about 11.25 meters.
How are they structured? All the same size?
Not necessarily. Formations could be balanced, with all 5 arrays being roughly equal in size. Or they could be unbalanced, where the flank and wing arrays were deliberately made larger, perhaps to attempt an envelopment or strengthen a particular side. Any surplus troops available beyond the standard formation requirements were strategically distributed to reinforce weaker sections or create reserves.
And mixing troop types.
Yes, formations could be either pure, consisting of just one type of force, say all infantry, or, more commonly it seems, mixed, combining different types of troops, elephants, infantry, cavalry, in a coordinated manner within the formation to leverage their different strengths.
And the attack modes. Truncheon, snake.
Right, those 4 basic modes of attack dictate the overall shape and movement of the formation. The truncheon formation for a direct, straight-ahead assault. The snake formation for a more sinuous, flexible advance, maybe over uneven ground. The circle formation for an outward expansion, perhaps to envelop the enemy. And the dispersed formation, allowing for independent action by smaller units, maybe for skirmishing or exploiting gaps.
And subtypes for each.
Loads of them. Each basic mode had numerous subtypes, each with its own specific tactical application, and often with evocative names like victorious, unassailable, or even invincible. He lists 18 types of truncheon formation alone.
Incredible detail.
It is. The choice of formation was often dictated by the need to counter the specific formation adopted by the enemy, though the text on counterformations wasn't fully translated in the source we used. There was also a fortified area established about 900 meters behind the main battlefield, serving as a secure fallback position or rallying point. And the best, most reliable troops were often kept concealed in reserve, not shown initially.
So who decided on the formation?
Commanders at various levels were responsible for arranging their units into the prescribed formations, following detailed rules and adapting to the specific situation and terrain, taking into account the strengths and weaknesses of their own forces versus the enemy.
It sounds like a true science of the battlefield, almost like a complex board game played out for real.
That's a good analogy. A very high-stakes board game.
What happened once these carefully planned formations actually clashed with the enemy? How did the battle unfold according to Kautilya?
Okay. The attack was typically initiated with the main force arrayed, as planned, while those reinforcements were held in reserve, often with the king himself positioned safely behind them, maybe 300, 400 meters back from the main line. The enemy would usually be engaged with just one or two of your array groups initially. The rest provided support, ready to exploit any breakthroughs or reinforce struggling friendly units.
A measured approach.
Yes, the general tactical principle was concentration of force. Use a significant portion of your best troops against the enemy's weaker units to achieve a quick breakthrough there, while engaging the enemy's strongest formations with a numerically superior force of your own best troops, often aiming for a 2-to-1 advantage if possible.
Overwhelm their strong points, break through their weak points.
It's exactly. Reinforcements were strategically deployed to bolster any friendly units that were under heavy pressure, or crucially, to exploit any weaknesses or gaps that appeared in the enemy lines during the fighting. Specific counterattacks were also prescribed for different situations.
Like what?
Deploying horses specifically against enemy infantry formations to break them up, using chariots against enemy cavalry, as they offered a stable firing platform, and using your elephants against enemy chariots, as elephants could often stop or overturn them, basically using your strengths against their weaknesses.
Rock, paper, scissors. But with armies?
A bit like that, yes. Weaker elements of the enemy force were ideally engaged with a stronger contingent of the same type of troop from your side, infantry versus infantry, cavalry versus cavalry. And throughout the battle, that psychological warfare element continued.
How so during the actual fighting?
Using various machines to intimidate or disorient the enemy, employing occult practices or spreading rumors of bad omens among their ranks, using assassins to target key enemy commanders if possible, making claims of divine association or favor for your side, frightening the enemy's animals again to disrupt their formations while keeping yours calm, inciting treachery among enemy soldiers or commanders during the battle, setting fires strategically to create confusion or block movement, and having agents embedded near the enemy lines, spreading false rumors and inducing panic. We're surrounded. Our flank has collapsed.
Chaos and confusion as weapons.
Absolutely. Then, after the enemy formation broke and they began to rout or flee, the victor's next move depended, again, on relative strength.
Right, you mentioned this earlier.
If the defeated enemy was still potentially stronger overall, maybe they had large reserves, suing for peace from a position of strength was advised. If they were of roughly equal strength, accepting a reasonable peace offer was prudent. And if they were significantly weaker, then decisive destruction or capture was the goal.
But with that caveat.
Yes, always the caveat. Avoid pushing a defeated army too hard, especially if they found sanctuary or were cornered. Don't turn a rout into a desperate, suicidal last stand, because cornered enemies could fight with unexpected ferocity and inflict unnecessary casualties.
So even amidst the chaos of battle, strategy and calculated responses were paramount, right to the very end.
That's the Kautilyan way, it seems.
Now, what about when the enemy didn't rout, but retreated into the relative safety of a fortified position, a fort? Sieges can be notoriously long and resource-draining affairs. How did Kautilya approach them?
Indeed. And Kautilya seems well aware of the difficulties. He outlines 5 distinct methods for taking a fort, listed generally in order of preference based on their potential cost and effectiveness.
5 methods. Okay, what are they?
First, and most preferred if possible, is psychological warfare, that Upajapa again. Try to get them to surrender without a fight. Second, enticing the enemy garrison to come out of the fort, maybe through deception or a feigned withdrawal.
Lure them out.
Third, weakening the enemy from within, known as apasarpa, undermining their ability or will to resist. Fourth, laying siege, perupasana, surrounding the fort, cutting off supplies, and starving them out or waiting for disease. And finally, only at the last resort due to the high cost in lives, launching a direct assault, avamarta, to storm the walls.
So assault is the least preferred option. Let's look at the others. Psychological warfare in a siege.
Yes, it aimed to terrorize the enemy population inside the fort, while simultaneously boosting the morale of your own besieging troops. Key tactics included subverting enemy officials through bribery, threats, or promises of reward if they opened the gates or betrayed their commander. Encouraging the general population within the fort to abandon their defenders and seek the conqueror's protection was also a goal.
How would they do that?
By demonstrating supposed omniscience, revealing secrets about the fort's weaknesses or the commander's plans, maybe learned from spies. Staging tricks to suggest divine intervention or displeasure with the defenders. Propaganda was crucial, using soothsayers or agents disguised as merchants or holy men to spread rumors of divine aid for the attackers and imminent defeat for the defenders. Agents would specifically target enemy chiefs with promises of rewards and better treatment if they surrendered or switched sides.
What about enticing them out?
Various deceptive maneuvers, maybe faking a withdrawal, hoping they pursue, setting traps just outside the gates, using spies inside to convince the commander it's safe to sally forth.
And weakening from within, upasarpa.
This involved using trusted officers who had secretly switched their allegiance. Sometimes these agents would gain the enemy's trust through elaborate ruses, like being publicly dismissed or banished by their own king. It also involved leveraging the complex relationships within the enemy's geopolitical circle of states, using the enemy's own enemies, your allies, or even subtly turning the enemy's allies against them. And if possible, strategically infiltrating a small force inside the fort's walls, perhaps disguised, to open gates or cause chaos at a critical moment.
Very cloak and dagger. So siege and assault were last resorts.
Yes, because they were costly and time-consuming. Before initiating a full siege, Kautilya advises efforts to deplete the fort's resources externally, destroying crops in the surrounding fields, cutting off supply lines, conducting raids on nearby villages that might support the fort, encouraging the local population to flee away from the fort.
Soften them up first.
Exactly. The optimal time to begin a formal siege was when your own supplies were plentiful and you knew, or suspected, the enemies were dwindling.
What did the siege itself involve?
Establishing protected camps around the fort, completely encircling it to prevent escape or resupply, contaminating their water sources if possible, filling in their defensive moat, undermining or breaching the fort's walls using specialized machines like rams or towers, or even tunneling, hunting down any hidden exits or sally ports. Throughout the siege, a combination of conciliation, offering terms, gifts, bribes, sowing dissension among the defenders, and the constant threat of force would be employed to encourage surrender.
What about using fire?
Interestingly, the indiscriminate use of fire against a fort was generally discouraged, perhaps due to the risk of destroying valuable resources or unintended consequences. However, specific methods for using fire strategically, like targeting wooden gates or structures, were described.
And more tricks.
Oh yes. Pretending to withdraw the siege was another deceptive tactic. This could involve elaborate ruses with fake allies seemingly coming to the fort's aid, or even introducing poison supplies into the fort via supposed sympathizers.
Wow. So if all else failed, then storming the fort.
Yes, the direct assault. This would only be undertaken when conditions were deemed favorable. Maybe a breach had been made in the walls, or intelligence suggested the defenders were weak. The timing was critical. Attack during fires, festivals, when guards might be lax, internal quarrels, when troops were known to be tired or had suffered heavy casualties, when defenders were sleep-deprived, or during adverse weather that might hinder them.
Exploiting any opportunity.
Exactly. The assault itself often involved a diversionary attack to draw defenders away from the main point of attack, often leading the assault with less reliable troops or even captured deserters to absorb the initial enemy fire and arrows, a grim tactic. But there were also rules of engagement mentioned, sparing those who surrendered, were falling down, turned their backs, or did not actively resist.
Some semblance of rules, even then.
Some. After the court was captured, it was crucial to thoroughly clear it of any remaining enemy loyalists and take precautions against hidden defenders or secret attacks before the conqueror made their formal, triumphal entry.
A methodical, patient, and often very cunning approach to siege warfare.
Definitely weighted towards avoiding costly assaults, if at all possible.
And finally, after all the hard-fought victories, the battles won, the forts taken, how did Kautilya advise on the crucial task of peacefully ruling newly acquired territory? That's often where empires can stumble, isn't it?
Absolutely. Winning the war is one thing, winning the peace is another, and Kautilya clearly understood that. He identifies 3 primary ways territory might be acquired: through inheritance, through reclaiming lands that were previously lost, and through outright new conquest. The advice differs slightly for each.
Okay, let's focus on newly conquered territory. That seems the trickiest.
Right. For newly conquered lands, his advice centers squarely on winning the hearts and minds of the populace. Integration, not just occupation. This involved actively substituting your own virtues for the previous ruler's perceived vices. If the old king was cruel, be merciful. If he was greedy, be generous. Be doubly good where he was good.
Show you're better.
Exactly. Implement policies that were seen as pleasing and beneficial to the people, and importantly, rooted in dharma, justice, and righteousness. Generously bestowing favors, gifts, and honors on key individuals and communities was important.
What about those who helped you conquer? The traders,
Rewarding those who had betrayed the previous regime was seen as necessary, often with greater rewards for those who had exerted themselves more or taken bigger risks. It encourages future cooperation. But crucially, adopting the local customs of the people was advised. Their way of life, their style of dress, their language, their traditions, even respecting their local gods, religious beliefs, and festivals, showing respect for their identity.
That seems quite insightful, assimilation through respect.
You could see it that way. Pleasing the local chiefs and elites by respecting their traditional rights, granting them exemptions where appropriate, and giving assurances of safety was also emphasized. Agents would be used here too, but this time spreading positive information about the new ruler and negative information about the old one. Propaganda for peace.
Managing the narrative.
Precisely. Ensuring the continuation of important local temple rituals was vital. Granting land and financial assistance to learned individuals, priests, and brave warriors from the local population helped win favor. Releasing prisoners taken during the conflict, providing aid to the poor and needy, these were all seen as important gestures. He even suggests prohibiting the slaughter of animals on specific religiously significant days, aligning with local sensibilities.
What about the old ruler's laws and practices?
Practices considered contrary to Dharma, or those seen as harmful to the treasury or the army's well-being, were to be gradually discontinued, but replaced with practices aligned with Dharma, not just abolished. Any potential remaining threats, members of the enemy's deposed family, powerful frontier nobles who might still resist, needed careful handling.
How? Elimination?
Not necessarily. One intriguing strategy was to grant them land, but land that was deliberately sterile or had low fertility, while simultaneously imposing exorbitant tribute demands. The idea was to make their position untenable and hopefully incite rebellion against them by their own tenants or subjects, rather than against the new conqueror. Very Machiavellian in a way.
Turning their own people against them. Wow.
And any officials held over from the previous regime who were known to be unpopular with the local populace were to be removed or transferred promptly. Show you're listening. The overarching goal was always to foster stability, gain acceptance, and integrate the new territory seamlessly and peacefully into the existing kingdom.
It sounds like a very sophisticated long-term understanding of how to build and maintain an empire, not just brute force conquest.
Exactly. It's not just about winning the battle, but truly winning the peace afterwards.
So what's the ultimate endgame, according to Kautilya?
Well, the epilogue to this kind of strategic thinking discusses the ultimate outcomes of successful conquest. Either peaceful enjoyment of the newly expanded territory, consolidating your gains, or the pursuit of further expansion, starting the cycle anew. Victory inevitably leads to shifts in alliances, new geopolitical landscapes, potentially creating new circles of states, and identifying a new natural enemy to contend with.
The game never really ends.
Not if ultimate ambition drives you. This sets the stage for a renewed cycle of conquest, perhaps subduing former allies or neutral kings who now pose a threat. The ultimate ambition described is the establishment of a Chakravartic Kshetram,
Which is?
a king-emperor's area of influence, ideally encompassing the entire Indian subcontinent, known then as Fartavarsha, a unified empire ruled according to Dharma. Kautilya even outlines 4 distinct strategic approaches to achieving this grand goal of essentially world conquest as they understood it then.
Wow, a truly grand strategy.
Indeed.
Well, learner, this has been an incredibly detailed deep dive into the military and strategic thinking of Kautilya. From his nuanced definition of warfare, covering everything from diplomacy to assassination, to the intricate specifics of army organization, battlefield tactics, the subtle art of siege warfare, and those crucial considerations for post-conquest governance. It's clear that his approach was remarkably comprehensive and, frankly, sophisticated for his time.
What's particularly striking, I think, is the interconnectedness of all these elements. For Kautilya, military action wasn't really a standalone endeavor, was it? It was deeply interwoven with diplomacy, intelligence gathering, meticulous logistical planning, and the long-term objectives of state governance.
Right.
It offers just a fascinating glimpse into an ancient worldview where conflict was seen as a complex, multifaceted instrument of state policy to be wielded carefully.
For me, several aspects really stood out today. The sheer level of detail in the Army's organizational structure down to the specifics of rations and animal care. The almost Machiavellian cunning evident in his descriptions of deceptive battle tactics and the psychological tricks in siege warfare,
Definitely.
and the very pragmatic, insightful advice on how to effectively govern conquered populations to ensure long-term stability. It's a far cry from just relying on brute force, isn't it?
Absolutely not.
This deep dive really provides, I think, a valuable shortcut to understanding a complex and highly influential body of work, offering insights into ancient statecraft that, as you've highlighted, still hold relevance or at least resonance in discussions of strategy and power today.
Indeed. And this raises a crucial question for you, learner, to ponder after listening. Considering Kautilya's profound emphasis on both military strength and the principles of ethical or at least effective governance,
Hmm.
what do you believe he considered the most critical factor for achieving lasting success? Was it the sheer might of the army, the strategic brilliance of the ruler, or the just and equitable administration of the realm that won people over?
The powerful question to contemplate. Where did the ultimate foundation of power lie, in his view? We hope these insights have sparked your curiosity and perhaps encouraged you to explore Kautilya's Arthashastra further. It truly is a treasure trove of ancient wisdom, filled with surprising and thought-provoking nuggets just waiting to be discovered. So what's the takeaway for you? Well, it invites you to think about how these fundamental ideas, strategic thinking, assessing risk, understanding human motivation and behavior, how they might offer useful perspectives for you in your work, maybe in personal situations, or just in making sense of the world around us.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
It really makes you think. So here's a question to leave you with. In our own world, which is still definitely shaped by competition, by strategy, by maneuvering, what specific timeless lessons from this ancient Indian text can you maybe pull out and apply to the challenges or maybe the opportunities that you face? Something to chew on. Until our next exploration together, keep diving deeper.